Welcome back to the World Base Builder channel. Today we are resuming exactly where we left off in last video with the creation of large station batteries. And we're also going to be starting with IC-10s and the IC-10 housing. So first up, we'll redo our entire power supply system, and then we will move on to automation later in the video. And since we're adding new batteries, we'll go ahead and get a few more turbines set up as well in order to maximize the charge on all of these larger batteries. So I finally got rid of all the heaters that I had back here in the corner, and I considered placing the large station battery here, but it really kind of blocks everything else and it doesn't need to be inside the base. So I think the better placement for it will be just outside the window. That way I can still see the charge state on the battery through the windows of the base. And it's also not taking up valuable real estate inside the base. So this is probably the best place for it. We'll go ahead and clean up some of the old connections we had and go ahead and set up the battery. As you can see, power is still a problem here at the base. It's not enough to charge even the airlock. Everything is pretty much flashing as energy becomes available based on the wind speeds on Titan. I also always forget that there is a need for electronics in a lot of these projects, so had to go inside and print a few electronics in order to finish off the large battery. But it's getting hooked up now, and so we will start charging it. I'll remove the small station battery that's up on the roof. I'll save that, put it aside for a future use, maybe in some auxiliary base that I want to have a consistent power supply for. I'm rerouting some of the power lines that drop down from the roof. The problem with this is that some of the power runs were actually in the way of being able to place more turbines, and there's plenty of space along the sides of the frames, so I'm going to use the sides of the frames for the power runs and then free up some space on the roof for more turbines. You can see here that some of these plants have actually taken damage either from pressure being out of range or temperature. I think most likely it's the temperature. It's a little bit hot. If the plants can actually grow to completion, then it really doesn't make a difference. There's no way to repair plants other than letting them grow all the way to completion. At that point, when you harvest them, they harvest the same. But obviously, if the damage gets all the way to critical, then the plants die and you have to pull them out and replant. So we have our first computer and IC10 and IC10 socket set up. So we are going to start programming. You'll see here that the filtration devices also have a representation here. Each of them also has an IC10 slot, as do a lot of the devices these days. But right now we're going to be focused on programming the IC10 chip that is in the IC housing. Turns out that plants can suffer from something called light poisoning. If you leave the lights on for too long, they stop growing and eventually die. Apparently, all knowledge of this was lost to me. It's been a while since I had to grow plants and stationeers that weren't already automated, so I am relearning as I go. So it's going to be a fairly quick and ugly, just turn on, turn off the hydroponic station. By turning it off, you turn off the light. It doesn't impact water going to the plants. It's pretty much just for the light that's on the actual station itself. I'll use some batch commands in case I add other hydroponic stations in the future, and also just to avoid using pins. I fully anticipate that at some point this IC10 chip will be controlling other devices within the base, such as pumps and whatnot, in order to control either the temperature, the heat in the room, and or the pressure. As you can see here from the Stationpedia, the desired light and dark for a plant, the grass specifically, is 10 minutes of light per day and 5 minutes of darkness per day. I don't believe the days are 15 minutes long, but it at least gives you a ratio of 2 to 1 for light versus darkness. So we'll set it up so that our plants get at least twice the amount of darkness they get per day, and hopefully at that point they'll be happy. You'll see light deficiency as well as darkness deficiency if you have the plant analyzer, which I highly recommend you invest in because it immediately shows you whatever issues your plants might be suffering, versus the mouse over that only tells you, thriving, moderately growing, or poorly growing. The plant analyzer will certainly give you a lot more detail. So we'll create basically a fairly simple, straightforward program that will time it so that the hydroponic station has twice as much light as darkness. So we captured that hash code for the hydroponic station. Now we'll go ahead and start creating the program. I suggest using the stop time button up there in the top. That just makes it so much easier not having to worry about things either blowing up or going thirsty or getting hungry. You can basically take your time and kind of program at your own speed. So I think that is a brilliant addition that has come out recently. I highly recommend using that. It also exists in the Stationpedia if you want to take your time reading the details within the Stationpedia. So go ahead and define the HydroStation hash code here. And I'll just convert the 10 minutes to 600, just cycles, seconds, whatever. It'll be the rough amount of time that we want to stay on. And then the dark will be half that at 300, which would represent approximately 5 minutes. But the ratio is just 2 to 1. I think from here we'll speed it up a little bit because this is a little bit slow. So this is a simple loop to turn on and off a light. About as simple a task as you can find for programming. So we'll just use the batch commands to turn on the hydro station and then sleep or pause for a certain amount of time. In this case, the light will be 600. And then we'll basically turn it off and then do the same thing, pause for the amount of time that's specified in dark, which is 300, and then go back to the beginning. As soon as I spell hydro hash correctly, this will work. But it's about as quick and dirty as you can get, and you would expect it to turn on and turn off a light with the given ratios. Using the IC10 housing is a good way to troubleshoot and monitor your program as it's running. So if you use the DB and then setting option, it will actually write out to the IC housing, and then you just mouse over the housing and it'll show you the value that's being represented on the IC housing. I just have to remember that it's DB setting, but I'll get there eventually. And then you can monitor things pretty much in real time as the program's running, or also use for troubleshooting. If it's stopping unexpectedly in a place you don't expect it to stop, then you can certainly fix that. There's something's been strange with the programming interface since one of the updates. Now if you put spaces or try to align things vertically, it starts to create strange returns. So that's why sometimes you have to exit and kind of go back into it. But here you can see I've got the DB setting now. I'm going to represent it as either 1 or -1. So 1 when it's on in the daytime and -1 when it's off in the evening. I was a little concerned I was missing something with the hydroponics station. I figured there was probably a light logic, but apparently there's not a separate light logic. And the Stationeers-wiki.com didn't really have a lot of details on this, and Stationpedia here doesn't have a lot of details. So I just went with on and off as my settings are on, and setting that to 1 or 0. I wasn't sure initially if that would also shut off water supply to the plants, but I set it up to run this way, and it does not shut off water supply to the plants. As far as hydration went, they were perfectly fine. So it's literally just on and off at the hydroponics station level, and that was enough to turn on and off the lights and let the plants continue to grow.
Oxygen critical.
As you can see here, the atmosphere is still a little bit weak for humans. O2 is a little bit on the low side, but the CO2 is certainly strong enough for plants. And that's really what I've been focused on. I can open and close my helmet rapidly enough to eat and drink, and that's pretty much all I've needed. Temperature is okay, a little bit on the high side. I'll work on that. And pressure's in the ideal range for plants. And there went our light. It went off. So the very ugly, very simple loop timer is working. So hopefully at this point the plants become a little bit happier. You can see this one is practically dead. It's got that last little smidge left. I'm not sure if it's going to survive or not. But hopefully now the deficiency, the darkness deficiency, will have been resolved. So here we're finally starting to get smart about plants by getting the cartridge plant analyzer installed into our tablet. It's pretty inexpensive. It is, I think, 1 iron, 5 coppers, 5 gold, but it gives you so much information, and if your life depends on your plants thriving, it is well worth the investment. You could see there that, my plant growth percentage was extremely low, and that is mostly due to dark deficiency. You can see the illumination stress there is 786, and actually slightly climbing, which is a little odd because it's dark now. The light is off. But once it's resolved, you can see there, it starts to rapidly drop. So the light is off. It's been off for a little while, and now it's taken that into account. So growth efficiency is at 14%. That's kind of the overall rating, and that'll be based on whether you're in the ideal temperature range, the ideal pressure range, there's enough carbon dioxide, there's not too many volatiles or pollutants, and all those details are on that analyzer now. So print off a tablet, paint it green, and put a plant cartridge analyzer in it and leave it somewhere near the plants. It is definitely worth the investment and will quickly resolve and answer any issues you may be having with your plants and allow you to take actions. So you can see here the illumination stress is dropping extremely rapidly. So even though some of these plants are pretty close to death, I think we've resolved the issue, and hopefully they recover, and we'll actually continue on to seeding so that we can harvest and get both the fruits and the seeds from them. So the plant's recovering pretty well here. It was at about 10% growth efficiency when I first looked at them. Now the illumination stress is dropping 300% now, and the growth efficiency is now 29%. So pretty impressive improvement. So hopefully all things are resolved. No pollutants, no volatiles, plenty of CO2. So plants are happy. We'll probably get a good harvest from this batch. So the hydroponic station that I thought was being controlled by the IC10 actually is not being controlled by the IC10. Number one, I have to fix that one typo that I still have in there. I finally got around to that. But also, it's just not behaving. If you turn it on, the first thing it should do is immediately turn on that hydroponic station light, and it is clearly not on. So there's an issue. The code is so simple and straightforward. Either I got the hash code wrong, or something else is going on. So one way to try and troubleshoot this is if you have a screwdriver, you can start cycling through the devices. And if you're using batch codes, even though you don't require a pin, it should still show up on the network. And if you're cycling through all the devices on one of the pins and you don't see the device that you're trying to control through those batch commands, it's not on the network with this IC10, circuit housing. So either that means that you have it on a different area controller, there's some sort of separation between the networks, a transformer or something that's basically separating the two networks, or you forgot to connect the data line. So in this case, it turns out that there's a data line on the hydroponic station that I didn't hook up, because originally I thought the hydroponic station is you plug it in, you turn it on, and you forget about it, you don't have to control it. So I didn't bother connecting the data line, which is right there. So now I have to connect that data line, and at that point it should appear as a device on that pin, and it should now be able to respond to the batch commands I've been sending to it. Right now batch commands have been sent down the network and there's nothing there to respond or receive them. This will alleviate that. Now if I pop out the IC and put it back in, since the turn on the light is one of the first commands. It immediately went on. I did turn it off again because it still has high levels of illumination stress, which are still dropping. So the extended darkness actually hasn't been detrimental. So I just manually turned it off. That's actually one small advantage to using this timing loop, is that the on command only shows up once and then it basically goes to sleep and, you know, does the sleep timer, the delay. So it's not continuously sending out on commands, which with a lot of the loops, when you have them kind of doing continuous loops, you'll turn off a device and immediately turns on, or you turn on a device and immediately turns off based on whatever the program is running at the time. So that's one small advantage here. I could just walk up to it, override it, and it won't turn on until the next cycle, which is actually probably going to be beneficial because the illumination stress is still dropping, and once it's 100% or lower, then you'll just leave the automatic timer running. Gonna run outside quickly here just to check the oxygen, maybe pump a little bit more oxygen into the base from the hydrolyzer. But also there's our big station battery fully charged. Didn't expect that to get fully charged as rapidly as it did, so that's certainly a positive sign. But we'll be adding more devices and putting more stress on the power systems as we go forward. So a new tablet is not too expensive. I'll pull it up right here. It only requires 2 gold, 3 copper, 5 solder. That's pretty reasonable. And then also the plant cartridge, I think, was 1 iron, 5 copper, 5 gold. So yeah, a little bit of investment of gold, but if you have it, having a dedicated tablet to your plants or your atmosphere or all the critical items you need, sometimes starts to make sense. It's kind of a pain to switch between cards even on the Mark II version. It always seems to be on the wrong card for me, but having a dedicated tablet for your plants is a good thing. And one thing you do is, as you move on to the advanced tablets for your main devices that you carry around, you can use your old tablets to be your plant analyzer. So that's another approach. Obviously, the advanced tablets are a little bit more of an investment with steel and electrum, but once you start to build those alloys, it's really certainly not beyond your means to do so. And that's what I will do here. As your base gets larger, or as you start to carry many and multiple devices, especially of the same type, it becomes pretty obvious that color coding is one way to keep things straight. Unfortunately, in order to build paint, you need the tool manufacturing. Up until now, I haven't really had a need. I haven't really been doing a lot of the advanced tools. The tools that I've had on hand have so far worked out fairly well. But as the things start to get a little bit more complicated and you want to differentiate, especially with your tablets, then color starts to become useful. So I'm going to look into potentially building a tool manufacturer here before the end of the video. So now that I have a tool manufactory, the big question comes where to put it. So this doesn't need to be inside. It's certainly not a device I'm going to use frequently or regularly. So placing it somewhere outside that's convenient is certainly an option and works well. So I'm just going to find a corner here and place it there. And then I will start producing paint and start coloring the world. So of course I ran out of regular cable. I'll just throw some heavy cable in here just because I want to get to my paint as rapidly as possible, and hey, just temporarily heavy cable will work. So throw some iron in there, and now I can start picking the colors that I like. And I'll start off with the white. Probably have some oxygen things I want to paint. It is probably a good idea to pick a color scheme and stick to it for sanity's sake. As your base gets larger, if you settle on a color scheme for yourself and stay true to it, it'll help it out later when you try to troubleshoot things or figure out what specific pipe or wire or device does what. So the time has come to make our plant analyzer tablet green. There it is. Now it's dedicated, and we'll keep it co-located here at the hydroponic station as long as it doesn't get lost. There we go, vertical. And we'll have it on hand if I do create other grow areas, greenhouses, plantations. I will definitely have one of those dedicated plant analyzers there. You can see our station battery there is already down to 3 blocks. That's a little alarming. It's gone through those pretty rapidly. I like to use blue for some of the electronics items, so the configuration analyzer, and I'll usually use red, just because it's associated with the red cables for some of the power analyzers. But the configuration cartridge I'll usually make blue just to differentiate that. That's helpful when you're trying to figure out like what each device does and what its current state is. So that's also a useful cartridge to have. What I'm doing here is trying to introduce a little bit of cool external atmosphere into my processing pipe network. That'll help lower the temperature inside the base a little bit. So this is the processing pipe network, and that has brought it down to 9 degrees Celsius. I'm trying to reduce the room temperature from 33 degrees Celsius down to somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. That's the ideal temperature range for many of the plants. So I need to process that through the filters and then release that into the room and see if that reduces the temperature a little bit. And I may need to repeat this process. But there you can see it's going down, okay, because I'm releasing it through the volatile filter, and so it's down to 29. And the pressure's good. I'll let it go up to about 80, 88, 90. And this should be ideal now for all the plants. So if I check with the plant analyzer, so my ideal temperature is now between 19 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius, so that's good. The pressure is between 51 and 110, so that's also positive. Light efficiency is good. No deficiency on lighting or darkness, so pretty much all around the plant should be happy and continue growing. So that was one of our goals here. We have a little bit finer 72%. You get 100% rarely. When the plant first starts growing and all these conditions are met, it'll be about 100%, but it never stays there all the time. But certainly anything above 50, 60, 70% is positive. So one of the scenarios I'd like to look into is trying to generate more oxygen with the plants. I don't want to depend on the water ice constantly. Now there is a fern, a Darga fern, which is custom built to generate huge amounts of oxygen. The regular fern is useful, especially when you want to start making medical tablets. It's one of the ingredients in the medical tablet that will heal any of your existing conditions. But it doesn't generate a huge amount of electricity. I think it's 8.64 moles per hour, which is the standard for most plants. The grass also does that. Yeah, there you can see it. The one that's been genetically modified or created is the Darga fern, which is 61.2 moles per hour. And the grasses, again, are back to 8.64 moles per hour. My focus so far with the plants has not been to generate huge amounts of oxygen. It's mostly been focused on trying to create plant matter, and to that end, the grasses have been brilliant, creating 15 hay every time you plant a seed. I'll start to shift my focus over to food production. Right now I've been living off the cans, so I want to become more self-sufficient, so I'll start to consider planting food. I usually prefer the canned French fries because they last pretty long, and it only requires soy plants and potatoes, which both grow pretty well and pretty rapidly, so they're pretty straightforward. And then later on I may focus on oxygen generation, maybe create greenhouses that are dedicated to just creating oxygen, because with the volatiles in the atmosphere, the hydrogen in the atmosphere, you can combine that with your plant-based oxygen and have a new source of fuel that will run your gas fuel generators and all of your other equipment. So that is definitely one of the end game goals I have, but for the moment what I've been doing here with just the grass has been sufficient. And with that note, I'll start to wrap it up here for this episode. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll join for future episodes. Thank you. Goodbye.